Assalamu alaikum. Today we are going to look at the remaining part of Plato's contribution to literary criticism. In the previous video, we spoke about his age in wax, the major concerns of his time, his contribution in terms of his writing, and his view on art, especially the theory of ideas, and his attack on poetry based on his three perceptions of poetic inspiration, emotional appeal of poetry, and non-moral character. Today we are going to look at the function of poetry. We spoke about how, in the last video, we spoke on how Plato believed that poetry had certain unfavorable traits that made it damaging to the society and to the self. Now we'll see what Plato believed poetry should be made of, or should look like. Okay. So first of all, he says that poetry, although it pleases, pleasure cannot be its sole objective. Okay, even though poetry may please you, may cause you some pleasure, but pleasure alone should not be its prime objective. For instance, you can, you would be able to relate better to it if you substitute poetry with the songs that you listen to. Okay, so there are songs that actually are meaningful, wholesome, great truth in it, and there are songs that actually are just plain rubbish or gibberish for that matter. Gibberish as in nonsensical. So they may sound good, but what good are they to you generally, except for some noise? Yeah, every poetry has to have other purpose besides causing pleasure. Art cannot be divorced from morals. Morals has to coexist. So whatever creative writing that you are making, it has to have certain morals in it to guide people. Again, the true test of poetry is truth. That is, any poetry that you come across could be held as good poetry only if it is honest. Okay, if it leads you to some truth. And we are not talking about merely truth as in honesty. Okay, it has to give you some life truths which we are blind to most of the time. Okay, see, we're not all philosophers. The main purpose of a philosopher is to show you that which is obvious but we are blind to. Okay, for instance, there is certain fault in us, we are behaving in a certain manner with our parents probably, or with the people around us in a certain way which is not good. Okay, not good in the sense maybe we are being too prideful, maybe we are being too vain, or maybe we are being selfish. Poetry should lead us to self-discovery. Okay, it should show a mirror to us, show us our flaws so that we can reform ourselves. Okay, it should lead us to some kind of truth, right? You understand this point? What is test of poetry? It should give us some truth. Okay, it should also contribute to the knowledge of virtue. Knowledge of virtue as in it should tell you all the things that you can, all the character traits that you can imbibe or you can develop in you. Okay, so it should contribute to the knowledge of virtue. It should show what is virtuous so that you could take it up or engage in actually. It should mold character and protect the interest of the state. An interesting point here. You may wonder how a character could affect the interest of a state. See, every individual's character, if it is molded to perfection, what would happen? Everyone in the country would be a good person. There won't be corrupt politicians. There won't be, ungoverned police officers. There won't be any conscienceless, doctors. There won't be any irresponsible teachers. There won't be any student who is too lax to take up the responsibility of learning and contributing to the growth of the society. Each character, if molded well through literature, it could protect the interest of the state. It would protect the interest of the state, and then the entire country would flourish. The entire country would prosper. Imagine a corruption free, crime free state. Can you imagine in India where there is no corruption at all? Where there is no crime at all? Crime against girls, crime against children, crime against women. Yeah. Or even lawmakers breaking laws. Yeah. Can you imagine that kind of state? He says Plato believes, at least it may be flawed, this belief. I'm not saying that it is it's a flawless point, but it is a possibility. It is a possibility we can think of. Now, he also believed that poet can be a good artist only if he can be a good teacher. As in, no poet, you can call no poet a good artist unless he can teach something. Okay? We must look for artists who are to trace the nature of beauty and perfection, that so our young men live in a healthy place may be influenced for good. That is, we need artists who can create healthy atmosphere for our young men to live, to grow, so that they understand the nature of beauty and perfection. Because see, most people tend to misunderstand and misrepresent beauty and perfection. They believe the outer form, the skin deep beauty is beauty. Okay, the nature of beauty itself is far too profound for normal understanding. If such an understanding could be met, a healthy place, I mean, we are talking about not merely of a clinical health, we are talking about mental, psychological, physical, moral health. Okay, if such a place could be created for our young men, they may be influenced for good. And why are we talking about young men here? Because the youth is responsible for the future of any country. If okay, I am resorting to a cliche here, but nevertheless, cliche or not, it is true. Okay, old people, they have little power, but young generation, if they can be molded well, the future of any country would be fantastic. Now, poetic truth must be the highest truth, ideal forms of justice, goodness, beauty, and the like. So what is the highest truth? The poetic truth. Why? Because in poetry alone you'll find ideal forms of justice. Ideal forms of justice as in what justice we see in real life is flawed. Okay, so there is a possibility that in poetry you could show what justice should look like, what goodness should look like, what beauty should look like. Okay, because you can idealize it. Okay, and what are ideas? Ideas are the blueprints on which you base any action or event for future, right? So commenting upon drama, he comments upon the representations of drama in poetry, indicating that again he places all the negative aspects first and then tells us the nature of drama. So he says drama is far removed from reality. One of his complaints against drama is that it is far removed from reality. It does not portray reality at all. At least you have to remember, drama in 4th century BC, 4th and 5th century BC, it mainly dealt with all those gods, goddesses, deities, and all those heroes, especially the immortals, and the twisted relationships they had, and it was basically far too incongruous for our understanding today. They were too complex. Anyway, I have made a mistake here in inspiration. IRATION. Anyway, it is the drama of his time were mainly the product of inspiration of not only his time, of all times. They are basically inspired. They are not reasoned out. So anything that can be reasoned out would affect, would have something to contribute. So he says you cannot rely on inspiration alone. Again, he has lays the same charge here, saying that it appeal to the emotion of a person, appeal to the feelings of a person, than appealing to the thought. So it was useless according to him. Again, it was unconcerned with morality. Well, by this time you must have understood his fascination with morals and morality. well, we cannot find fault with such high, expectations. It's appeal to basic instinct. Drama appeal to the baser instinct of a person. We have the higher instincts, the higher thoughts and the baser instincts. Higher thoughts are what makes us better, greater. And the baser instincts is what lowers us. We try to suppress it as much as we can, and only then our higher instincts would come into play and would become the core of our character. So to please a heterogeneous audience is in mixed audience. There are all kinds of people visiting the theater, right? So to please a heterogeneous audience, a dramatist introduces what everyone likes. Okay, there'll be chorals, lamentations in tragedy, imitations of thunder, and cries of beasts in comedy, and all sorts of things that you won't normally like to see going on, in reality. So again, you don't really need them. You don't really need chorals and lamentations. You can set standards where chorals are avoided through wit and humor, where lamentations are avoided with a certain dignity. Okay, and again, you could yeah, of course, you could set good standards. It arouses baser instinct which normally people would be ashamed of in real life. Of course, we don't, baser instincts are what we try to avoid revealing to anyone, revealing in public. So it arouses those basic instincts. Again, it leads to bad taste and laxity in discipline. See, if it is going to give you all sorts of, mm, debased, immoral characters as standards, you are bound to emulate them at some point of time, right? So that is what happens with our Tamil and Hindi movies, or even Hollywood movies for that matter. If a hero is shown to be a conniving thief and he is idealized for being, living mainly on his wit, that tends to lay a very low standard for normal people, or the gullible, the vulnerable people. Yeah, it would lead not only to bad taste. It is like you are given substandard works for so long that you assume that is the normal standard, right? Again, it would not only lead to bad taste, but it would also bring laxity in discipline, that you would feel that, okay, you see all these characters in movies that that are so proud about having an arrear in their exams. And what happens ultimately, I have seen youths who believe that it is all right to have arrears, it's all right to fail in exams. Of course it is all right if at some point you tend to fail despite having worked hard. But to glorify such an action would be utterly stupid. Yeah, I mean, if you can think rationally, you would understand that how much money is being wasted. How much money, how much effort is being wasted. So you see, we are through bad taste, we are led to bad taste and laxity in discipline through bad examples in drama. Effects of impersonation as in acting. So by impersonating evil characters, actors are at risk of developing some of those evil qualities within themselves. So for instance, there is an actor who is playing the part of a villain. All right, now this actor, Plato believes, is quite possible that he may imbibe certain some of those evil traits within himself. So there is a possibility of him being corrupted at some point. Again, even an innocent character, impersonation would curb one's true individual self. So it's not merely the evil characters we are talking about, even the individual, the innocent characters that an actor plays would affect his individual self at some point. He may get into his character so much that his own true self could, there is a possibility, it could be diminished at some point. Again, tragedies that represent the best and the noblest in life are of positive benefit to the community and deserve to be encouraged. As in, even though there are difficulties concerning impersonation, there are troubles and risks involved, he feels if the tragedies that can represent something that is best and noblest in life, those kind of tragedies can benefit to the community, and those kind of tragedies deserve to be encouraged. We need to create more of those kind of tragedies. Okay. Again, he made a comment upon tragic and comic pleasure. So it's a very common question if you think about it. People ask, what is it in a painful scene that causes pleasure? Of course, you can we watch, all the jokes and comic scenes because it induces laughter. Yeah, it makes us laugh, it makes us happy. Why do we need to watch a sob story? I wonder how many of you who are listening to me right now are are fond of all those Tamil episodes or even Hindi episodes that you see every day that goes on for maybe hundreds to hundreds of episodes. Plenty, I think. So, what do those episodes have? What does the serial comprise of? Mainly, there'll be one protagonist or maybe a bunch of protagonists who are going through a difficult situation. First, there'll be one problem, and she would have a hard time coming out of it. And finally, when she finds some brief reprieve, more trouble is dumped on her. Yeah, again she goes through the same process again and again. So it's kind of an endless cycle where she is always facing some problem or the other. Life is not like that. I mean, of course, we do face problems, but not to that melodramatic extent. And what makes us watch them in the first place? Well, Plato believed that we find a certain kind of pleasure in watching someone else's pain. I know it is a very perverted thought, but nevertheless, it is true to some extent. Well, we'll see it in the next point. Human nature is a mixture of heterogeneous feelings. All our feelings, whether it be you, me, or anyone else for that matter, we do not just possess a single kind of feeling within us. We have anger, envy, fear, grief, and others. So, all these feelings, okay, basically, these are negative feelings we're talking about here, basically. So, all these feelings, they have a certain grip on us. Okay, they do not, sometimes they may occur together in combinations, but but they do. Everyone experiences these emotions at some point of time or the other. There will be time when you're angry, there'll be time when you're envious of someone, or you're afraid of something, or you're grieving for someone or something. But it is a momentary, it's a very transitory emotional state, or a transitory state of emotion. It does not extend endlessly. But you must have noticed, you might have come across people who are perpetually angry, you know angry all the time. They get so easily angry, angry so easily. At the drop of a hat, they'll be angry. They indulge in anger, what you would call them. They don't just become angry, they indulge in excess in this emotion. Now, envy, again, another bad trait which we all possess. We see someone progressing while we are not, we do envy them. Yeah. So, you know this is something that occurs naturally, that happens naturally to all of us. But if we indulge in it, like we are envious of everyone around us, what would happen? We, all our emotions are centered around this one particular emotion. This becomes a dominant emotion. We indulge in envy. Again, fear. There are people who are afraid of everything, you know so it is okay to be afraid of something, a few things. It is because it is an it is human nature to be afraid of certain things. But if you indulge excessively in fear, you would become a coward. Okay, so what is the difference between a brave person and a coward? Both feel the same kind of fear. Only difference is that a coward gives in to fear, and the brave tries to overcome fear. All right. Again, the same applies to grief. We all grieve for something or the other at some point of time in our lives. But there is a difference. People who are practical, who are reasonable, they tend to come out of that grief by putting in all the effort they can and try to move forward. And the ones who try to who derive pleasure from indulging in grief, they tend to give in to it so much that they grieve all the time. They are unable to come out of it, of that state. So, what Plato believed was that these emotions, which are painful by themselves, they afford pleasure when indulged in excess. So, tragedy gives us this, help makes us indulge in excess in all these emotions and gives us pleasure through it. So, how does one derive pleasure from comedy then? It is derived from laughter. Now, there are all kinds of laughter. Happy laughter, joyous laughter, exultant laughter, or cynical laughter, or derisive laughter. Yeah, there are all kinds of laughter. When you come across a laughter, or even there is self-deprecatory laughter, yeah, where you laugh at yourself. So he says, when a coward is behaving as a brave man, fool as a wise man, and cheat as an honest man, you tend to laugh. But he says it is cruel to laugh at a fellow being's weaknesses. Fellow beings' weaknesses, as in the frailties of mankind. You should not laugh at them. You should try to improve upon them. You should try to help them come out of it. Or if not, it is something that should incite pity in you, not laughter. So he says, no character can be comic unless he is lovable. So a character could be comic only if it could be loved, it could be related to. He made certain observations on style, or rather laid down rules for good speech. You should remember that Plato's age was mainly known for oratory and philosophy. There were great orators during his time, and he, based on that, he laid down certain rules as to what would make a person a good orator, a good speaker. Orator is nothing but speaker. Okay. Now, those rules are applicable to writing as well. If you're going to write, you need to have these essential requirements fulfilled. Okay. So this happens in, all these rules are laid down in Phaedrus, one of his dialogues. We spoke about multiple dialogues of his, right? So one of his dialogues states these rules. First essential is that one needs to have a thorough knowledge of the subject. You need to have a very thorough knowledge. You should have read extensively about the subject before you proceed to speak on it or write on it. What is art of speech? He spoke about the essential art of speech, which is, which comprises of three components. A, natural gift. B, knowledge of rules. And C, constant practice. First of all, it is a natural gift, because see, you must have come across people who can speak so well naturally. Yeah, nobody has taught them that. So it is a natural gift. But if you have natural gift alone and have no knowledge of rules and you don't have any practice, this gift would be useless. The best use of gift is it putting it to good use. So one needs to have knowledge of rules. So how to speak well? What are the components that make speech well? The tonal variations, the the pauses, all those things. So the same goes for writing as well. You have all these books on creative writing. Yeah, all the literary devices that you need to remember, to you need to practice and understand to make your writing attractive. So you need to have knowledge of rules, and also practice, consistently practice. So this would, all these three would make your speech beautiful. Natural sequence of thoughts. So he believed that one needs to be a good orator. You need to start from the first, go to the middle, and then last. It has to be sequential. You cannot go into it haphazardly. One needs to possess a knowledge of human psychology. See, this is very important. This is very crucial, because see, without understanding the nature of your hearer, your audience, you cannot blindly go and spout your philosophy. Your philosophy, your talk should be something that would reach the hearer's heart and soul. You should be able to touch the person somehow. You cannot give the same speech to an adult, or it's same speech to a child that which you would give to an adult, right? or even to a certain kind of audience. There are all kinds of audiences. So you need to have a basic understanding of the human psychology. His value of criticism rests on mainly his understanding of the nature of poetry and the function of poetry and the method of poetry. Okay, so he believed that truth is a test of poetic greatness, and he also showed the distinction between life and poetry, how there are two kinds of truths, and literature could give you higher truth, if used well. And he also spoke about the theory of idea nature of poetry, which meant that it was twice removed from reality. Poet's version of truth was twice removed from reality. And he also spoke about the function of poetry, speaking of how the poet's main function is to instruct rather than delight. But his writers of his time, poets of his time, disregarded that function and had a non-moral character tinge to their works. And speaking of the method of poetry, it had to make you think rather than feel. The emotional appeal of poetry is something that he complained against. Again, he spoke about the moral teaching. So by this time, you must have understood the fascination he had for moral teaching. You know, and then yes, he was extremely against melodramatic and farcical scenes. He wanted it to be removed somehow because it created a certain incongruity in the scenes, in the play itself, that was totally not relatable. Melodrama is not good for any play. Too much of bloodshed, too much of killing, too much of vices, too much of artificiality. It results in a very degraded kind of play. He was the first to see that all art is mimesis. Mimesis would be merely imitation. You must have heard of mimesis and diegesis. While mimesis meant imitating, diegesis meant telling. Yeah. So he saw that poetry or literature or any other form of art imitated objects of life and nature. And then he made the distinction between the various genres available during his time uh, of how there was dithyrambic, that were purely lyrical poetry, mimetic drama, that included action and speech, and the mixed kind. Mixed kind as in the one that mixed both drama and lyrics. That was the epic. He considered epic the superior kind of literature during his time. And finally, to interpret poetry, one must possess knowledge of poetry and principles of his composition. In Aeon, one of his dialogues, Aeon is one of his dialogues, he says, to interpret poetry, one has to possess the knowledge of poetry and principles of his composition. Unless and until one knows it, one does it, you won't be able to form a proper judgment of poetry. Thank you. Thank you for listening patiently. Stay safe. In the next video, maybe, inshallah, we'll try to start working on Aristotle's understanding of, or Aristotle's contribution of literary criticism. Thank you so much. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum.